Hey everyone, my name is Britt Myers and I'm here to share with you my journey to reimagining DevOps. So a little bit about me, I'm the VP of Engineering at System Initiative. I'm a mom of 4 living in Cleveland, Ohio, where I was born and raised, and I've been leading engineering teams building B2B applications for well over a decade. So my journey to DevOps starts as an entry-level software developer, but over the course of my career, I've had the opportunity to learn and explore how technology, people, and process sort of all work together to impact our ability to deliver value through technology. So let's start with technology. Over time, I've iterated closer and closer towards sort of a modern cloud architecture. As the principles and best practices evolve, we've tried to adopt them and consume them and iterate on our architectures over time. And of course, the transition did not play out as this diagram depicts, where, there's sort of one massive change that causes all of these things to shift. All of this was kind of piecemeal over time as we learned, as the business needs changed, and as our understanding about how to meet the business needs evolved as well. All right, let's talk about the people side of things. I have always been incredibly passionate and a bit nerdy about organizational design and team makeup. And I have been incredibly fortunate to be able to experiment a lot with many different ways of organizing over my career. When I first started, the organization had completely separate dev, QA, and cloud operations silos. We moved on from there by combining dev and QA under a single leadership structure, hoping to reduce dependencies, reduce prioritization trade-offs, and reduce the coordination required to get a release out the door. As I transitioned to start working on some cloud-first applications, we started with back-end, front-end, desktop, and mobile teams, which led immediately to dependency madness, leading us to experiment with cross-functional teams. Meanwhile, the organization as a whole was growing tremendously, both organically and through acquisition. And with much of that growth brought the inevitable reorg. And the result of one of these reorgs, we ended up with a DevOps Center of Excellence. Now you'll notice immediately preceding our DevOps Center of Excellence, we had 2 DevOps Centers of Excellence. In this case, one was for R&D and one was for cloud operations. But nonetheless, we continued to experiment and iterate on some ways of working. One of the more interesting things that we did was a self-selection exercise, whereby at quarterly boundaries, we would facilitate the ability for individuals to decide who they're going to work with and what they're going to work on, right? So we would come together as a leadership team. We would decide what are the things that we're going to do for the quarter. And then the teams would more or less self-organize around that work and organize themselves in the best way that they felt possible in order to get the work done as efficiently as we could. And so before we totally abandoned self-selection, we supercharged it, where instead of switching up teams at quarterly boundaries, we were much more just-in-time planning and just-in-time staffing. And so sometimes when one team would finish their work, they would disperse and go support the teams around them. And other times the team wanted to stay together. And so we would get together and we would plan more work as a group. We also experimented with the you build it, you run it model, not just having all of the skills required to build the features on the team, to test the features on the team, but also to deploy them, to deploy the infrastructure, to manage the infrastructure, and to manage the service over time as well. Part of this was from a place of, again, like reducing dependencies, wanting to have more ownership and be in control of our destiny, not fall victim to shipping things over the wall. We wanted no wall, and so we were willing to just take on all the responsibility we could in order to make it happen. And this pretty quickly led us to understand that a lot of what these teams needed in order to build it and run it themselves is that they all needed this like base level set of functionality. You need alerting, you need monitoring, you need telemetry, you need some dashboarding, right? And pretty immediately, as soon as we had a platform team, we knew that we needed to treat that platform as a product. And so it needed a product manager. We needed to talk about the business value. We needed to talk about the ROI of the work that we're doing, how it's impacting the organization, where the dependencies are. I particularly liked this sort of platform as a product lens to help us decide what we do, when we do it, and in what order. And structuring it as sort of a product team helped give us the organizational support to manage priorities, to manage dependencies, and to manage trade-offs at a much higher level of the organization. All right, lastly, let's explore process a bit. Sometimes process can be reactive. Sometimes it can be proactive. Sometimes it serves as sort of a layer of risk mitigation. Sometimes it's a stage gate sort of checkbox that you do. So each of those reasons for having a process impact the team differently, which is why I find it so incredibly interesting. So again, in the beginning, I started off with sort of a pretty stereotypical waterfall planning process. We were releasing new versions annually. meaning that the order of the work that happened in that year was a lot less important than when you're releasing all the time. Some teams would always end up overbooked. Some projects came in late. So it wasn't, a full sort of waterfall in that you set the plan up front and you never diverge. We changed plans. We learned as we went. Some teams were doing Scrum. Some were doing Scrum-ish. Some were doing Kanban. Some were doing Scrumban and sort of every flavor in between. But the coordination wasn't really needed at a sprint level because these teams could basically iterate in parallel for so long, given the nature of the release cycle. So then when I shifted to start working on the cloud applications, we started with quarterly planning and quarterly releases. I have done SAFe. I've used project management and sort of managed feature development like projects. I've used program management and sort of coordinating, multiple things happening across a program, iterating up to sort of the ability to release on demand, running A/B experiments, and even sort of releasing on commit. So in parallel to sort of the planning process side is like the release, deployment, and ops side. Everything started manual. Testing was manual. Provisioning was manual. Deployment was manual. Upgrades were manual. Rollbacks were manual. Everything was manual. And over time, we just started sort of scripting our way through those manual steps. And so we got to sort of automated provisioning, full automated delivery, and with the adoption of public cloud, we were able to take advantage of things such as infrastructure as code, resulting in your more traditional, modern-looking CI/CD pipelines. But as soon as we were able to deploy these services independently, we desperately wanted to do that. And one of the major areas of coordination was in releasing or launching new features to customers or to users. And so we took advantage of feature flags. I wasn't really sure whether to put this under process or technology, but I kept it under process because it served two very important purposes for us. The first was that decoupling the deployment mechanism from the launch motion. And so whether that was releasing features whose impact spanned cross independent systems, or maybe there was some go-to-market motion happening in parallel as development was happening. And what we wanted to be able to do was get all the code out there into production and enable product to sort of press a button to say, yep, these people get this feature or these people get this feature, and so on and so forth. Next, I'd like to take a moment to just share with you some of the key lessons I learned through all of that experimentation and all of that iteration across people, process, and technology. The first is that having one person with a different skill set on the team doesn't make that team cross-functional, because that person needs support, they need code review, they need design review, they need to keep in touch with how the overall architecture of the system they're working on is evolving over time. And if it's only them with that skill set on that team, that means they have nobody on their team to collaborate with. And so you're immediately adding more dependency across the teams than you intended to. The second lesson is around feature flags. They are amazing to be able to, decouple shipping from launching, but they are by no means a silver bullet. And we have been burned more than one way. And there were situations where we ended up increasing risk rather than decreasing risk. The third lesson is that as technology leaders, we need to consider the dependencies and coordination at every stage of development. Planning, executing, validating, deploying, operating. And so it's very important that you go into this heads up that even if you're iterating on your org chart, even if you're iterating on architecture, consider not just what happens at execution, right? Just because the code can be written in parallel doesn't mean it can be deployed in parallel, and doesn't mean that if there's an outage or an incident, that both of those teams need to work together to resolve the issue. And this is also true of planning. I think this is an often overlooked one, which is prioritizing the work. What are the things that you're having to trade off between? In my example where we had the DevOps Center of Excellence, that team was supporting multiple product lines, which means the prioritization decisions they had to make were what is more important, this product or that product. More often than not, the leaders of those technology teams don't have the context to be able to make that decision to say whether product A is more important, more strategically important than product B to be able to execute the work. So if what you're doing is building a center of excellence, make sure that that team has all of the support they need to make those decisions as quickly as possible. Another lesson is don't underestimate the impact of cognitive load on your teams. This became especially true for us as we pursued you build it, you run it. Every tool, every process, every step along the way required the team to have more information ready at hand more often. And this over time can be incredibly taxing if what you're doing is increasing sort of their scope, increasing their domain, or as the organization is growing. Another key lesson I learned is that the leadership team is a team too. The dynamics of the leadership team are incredibly important. They impact your team's ability to deliver. And with that leadership team is sort of a triad where you've got product, UX, and engineering involved, or maybe you've got multiple teams needing to collaborate. And so you have multiple engineering managers and multiple product managers. Whatever that core group is, they are a team. And so it's important to think about the team dynamics, the communication styles, how they're collaborating, how they're making decisions, just as you would the engineering team as well. And the last lesson I learned is it's very important to pay close attention to the day-to-day of your team. Now, I'm not talking about micromanaging them, but what I am talking about is how easy is it for your team members to just do their work? How easy is it? How enjoyable is it to get the job done? The less enjoyable it is, and the harder it is to do things that otherwise should be easy, you're just going to drive your team right into a burnout if you're not careful. And so this is an area where oftentimes teams just learn to suffer with what they're given. They try to make the best of it. They try to keep their head up. But I think this is an area where leadership can really step in to look for opportunities to improve their lives, to improve how it feels to do the work that we're asking them to do day in and day out. And that can have such a drastically positive impact on the outcomes that you're looking for. And so what was the point of all of these changes? Why was I doing any of this in the first place? And if I really sort of distill it down, the thing that I was ultimately after as a technology leader was better outcomes. How do we build better features that deliver more value to users? How do we have higher quality? How do we have a more flexible architecture? How do we have a product that is more secure, that is more performant, that is more scalable, more reliable, more resilient, and more stable? And then we do all of those things without embarking on a multi-week or multi-month rewrite or refactor of major parts of the system. And so in 2016, when I read the DevOps handbook, this sentence was exactly what I was after. And so what we need is faster feedback for why what we're doing right now is not leading to those better outcomes. For all the talk about feedback loops in DevOps, I don't think that we're speaking about it specifically enough. It's very important for us to be clear what we want feedback on and who we want that feedback from. When you orient yourself around feedback loops, but you're ignoring the context of the feedback and who the feedback is coming from, you're missing key insights that can help you and your teams make better decisions the first time. Interestingly, the list of stakeholders here that will weigh in on whether something is the right thing to do, whether it's the right way to do it, or whether we got it done right, are the same stakeholders that DevOps intended to foster collaboration with, aligning us around a common goal, enabling us to deploy changes quickly, reliably, with stability. And so if we want better outcomes, and we know we need faster feedback to get those better outcomes, we need to make it easier for our teams to collaborate on this work. And so what exactly is so hard about collaborating? There's really three things holding us back today. Number one, the context switching is far too brutal. Too often, you're having to relearn technologies, reorient yourself to another abstraction, relearn the nuances and how the tools work and how they fit together, and understanding all of the glue that is holding our systems together. None of this helps with collaboration, especially when every team has a slightly different perspective on what that context is and a slightly different understanding of reality. The second thing that makes it really hard to collaborate is that our system has such low intelligence. Every time you're having to understand the state of your infrastructure, the state of production, especially when you're working across teams, we have to rely so heavily on our team's ability to conceptualize the information based on what is statically configured in files that are checked into one or many repositories with one or many repository organization styles. This makes it hard for everybody to have the same understanding. It makes it hard for the teams to feel confident about the changes they have to make. And there's such a higher risk for mistakes, as you have to remember all of the places you have to touch in order for that decision to become a reality. And lastly, we live in what we call handoff city. We've come quite a long ways, but unfortunately, we've replaced support tickets for pull requests and design documents or product requirements documents for conversation. And it makes sense, right? It's easier to document the thoughts, have time to review it, have time to reload all of that information back into your brain, all that context, before you suggest alternatives, before you say, yeah, I think this is a great idea, it'll work, or no, it's not going to work at all, and here are these reasons. Those reasons are hidden. They're hidden in tools, they're hidden in code, they're hidden in repositories, and they're sort of littered throughout our technology landscape. The other thing that we're lacking is a place where our teams can come together to do the work together. Our tools are keeping us apart. Our systems are keeping us apart. And what we need is to have more shared context, to have more constructive conversations, and to actually collaborate on the work. And not just for the sake of it, but because it feels good, because we can achieve more together. And because the tools aren't in our way, the abstractions aren't in our way, our technology stack is no longer in our way. And so I'd like you to imagine a world with me where our systems have high intelligence, where the relationships between configuration elements are captured, meaning you can go from deciding what to do to having it done much more quickly, because now you don't have to remember where all the places are that you have to update in order for that change to be reflected in your environment. Imagine a world where the context switching is natural and you can stay in your flow state, feeling productive, feeling like you know what's going on, and not like you're having to reach into a toolbox you haven't touched in a while, or constantly having to dust off those cobwebs, relearn things you once knew, all the meanwhile potentially losing the plot of what you were trying to do in the first place. Imagine a world where collaboration is easy, where there's shared understanding for how the system is composed, how it's architected, how it's connected, where you can more easily see who has done what and when, and even who's in there working with you right now. Whether you're swarming on an incident, iterating on some new infrastructure you need for some new services, or simply maintaining the infrastructure as it exists today. And imagine what you could do if you had short feedback loops where you got feedback on your design before you implemented a prototype, before you made any changes into production. Luckily, we don't have to imagine for too long, because at System Initiative, solving these problems in this way is exactly what we have been working towards. System Initiative is a real-time, multiplayer, multimodal reinvention of DevOps tooling. It's a DevOps power tool. We've taken a novel, new approach, allowing you to build a full fidelity model of the resources in your system as a digital twin. You're then able to qualify the model in real time. You can use relationships between those components to confer configuration. You can automatically generate necessary code, and the entire thing is fully programmable and customizable within the application itself, reducing that context switching and reducing that cognitive load. If you'd like to learn more about System Initiative or join the conversation about where DevOps needs to go for the next decade plus, I'd love for you to join our Discord. Bring your questions, bring your skepticism. We'd love to have an open conversation. We're also in open beta, so if you're interested in trying the product yourself, definitely head to the Discord, head to our website and sign up. And we'd love any feedback or ideas you have about ways that you think System Initiative can have an impact for you. And with that, I thank you for your time, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the 90 days of DevOps.